Good evening, everybody. I do see a lot of familiar names in the participants list. So I fear this may be a repeat of a lot of what I say on my other channels and in discussions with people. What I really want to do today is leave folks with more questions than answers, because this has been our journey at Rainmatter, and this has been my personal journey over the last few years, as the problem statement around climate itself and food systems started to take over, started to take over my mind share over everything else practically. So I'm calling it, it's not just temperature and carbon, because this is how the climate problem gets presented to us by default wherever we go. And this happened at Rainmatter as well. And it's what you read across climate reports, climate journals. It's the large framing at the level of COP, although it's changing dramatically this year. So the whole idea of climate as a set of numbers, as a set of technical problems to fix, etc., is something that most people actually on the ground cannot associate with. They can't see their participation in both the problem and the solutions in the long run. And the challenge that we were facing was that beyond the carbon numbers and the temperature numbers, there was very little action on the ground that people thought related to climate itself. So we started digging deeper, really. This is something I read sometime, I think end of last year or earlier this year. These are various planetary boundaries that scientists track all over the planet. And it's interesting, this year we actually finally computed what scientists call novel entities. These are 350,000 different materials that we inject into the biosphere. This is including carbon, but it also includes stuff like PFAS, which we have now been reading about, shows up in rain even in the remotest parts of Tibet, for instance. It shows up in our landfills, it shows up in our soil now, it shows up in our bloodstream. A lot of the younger kids have grown up with microplastics in their cells and their bloodstream pretty much from day one. And that's a very sad commentary on our species. So it's interesting. What we call climate change, very, very technically from the temperature point of view, is not the boundary that we have transgressed the most. It's novel entities, it's biosphere integrity. Land system change, how we use our land itself is far more than acceptable for the planet, right? So if you really look at this graph holistically, it's very clear that you can't get fixated on one number, on one dimension of the problem and hope to achieve anything, because these are all interlinked as well. So this is what started shaping our thinking in some sense, that these problems are actually connected. In the traditional sense, all the fixes are to be found in transport and energy, because it's the temperature rise that links to carbon dioxide and methane now, and then that links back largely to transport and energy. But it doesn't talk about all the other stuff that we are doing. It doesn't acknowledge that we are at a point where we may have crossed 5 out of 16 tipping points. This is a more recent framing. We were, I think, at less than half of that number. We tracked about 6 or 7 tipping points earlier, and now that had expanded to tracking about 16, and we may have crossed 5 or be very, very close to them. So we are also at a point where we have kind of sort of fallen off the cliff. So the thinking on causing less harm is what net zero in the future, offsets, all of these mechanisms that we are largely looking at. That's what they try to achieve. So it's not enough. It's clearly not enough. There was also a report, I think day before yesterday, saying that most of the world, and this was in the UK's context, most of the world is way below their targets on cutting emissions, right? And even if you did manage to cut the emissions, we were well on track for reaching 1.5 degrees centigrade. We were well on track for reaching a 2 degrees centigrade average increase. So clearly, the way we are framing the problem, the way we are looking at the solutions right now is not going to suffice. Very, very core to this is that we're not ready to look at the entire map, right? When you're looking at the 350 different entities that you inject into the planet, it tells you where you have a role to play as a consumer, as somebody who runs FMCG, as somebody who runs marketing, as somebody who runs policy, governs the country, runs logistics, because all of these entities are a very intrinsic part of what we call the economy today, right? And these are all interconnected feedback loops as well. So each year we realize that our models are very, very wrong. The numbers we had predicted for London temperatures for 2040 happened in 2022. We have seen unprecedented flooding across the world, unprecedented droughts, crop failures in 2022. And these were scenarios projected over the next century, right? Even last year, Europe was actually painting scenarios where this would play out over the next few decades. Their imagination was that the third world would get hit the most because, well, you know what? The first world had money. This year, they realized that it's not as black and white as that, right? So the food security, energy security are part of the conversation in Europe today, and we are all aware of that. So we're only starting to realize how deeply interconnected these loops are. So we started asking questions about carbon, the temperature rise are fine. Where does this transport and energy get used? Because transport and energy are not end users in themselves, except in very small cases, right? They are what we do other things with. So have we apportioned transport and energy? All right. And led us to very interesting answers. It led us to a whole lot of intersections. Energy, for instance, across India is very, very deeply linked with food systems, which use a lot of irrigation. Any state uses at least 30% of its electricity budgets for agriculture. So optimizing agriculture, for instance, would be a far better answer to climate change than just looking at the energy transition in itself. So the intersections across all of these things, across food systems, across forests, land use, transportation, industry, energy, construction, the urban planning tools that we use today, all of this became very, very interesting as we started to deep dive into the problem. So we put it all on a whiteboard. Over time, we kept refining it. And we started just trying to draw lines between them. It got very, very complex very, very quickly. And we realized that this is a view that needed a lot of people, a lot of different solutions. It was not one answer. It was not any silver bullet that would actually help solve this thing. But the realization that this is connected, the realization in an everyday way in our daily lives that this is connected is honestly the toughest challenge we face right now. So yeah, we found a few good articulations of the systems problem that this is. This is just a climate adjacency report from DESTA, who's done some fantastic work on this. This is from one of their reports. as we started studying this, we realized that all these words thrown at the problem, adaptation, mitigation, these are actually fairly superfluous. When you start looking at the root causes of what led to these behaviors that led to more carbon and more temperatures and so on and so forth, adaptation and mitigation sometimes, right? We started to think of what was cause and what was effect. For instance, in food systems, is the current form of agriculture going to get impacted by it, or is it also something that worsens the problem? And the answer is both. In an immediate sense, you need to adapt food systems to respond to the changing heat, to the unpredictable flood cycles, unpredictable drought cycles, and so on and so forth. But you also realize that as you do that, it has a massive impact on the problem itself in the long run. So looking at these as in separate buckets, etc., is not the smartest thing. Putting them on a map, trying to understand the cause and effect loops within them, started to become more and more useful to us as we did this. So another thing we realized early as we started to study this is today we go in with solutions first. We just land somewhere and say, you know what, this needs offsets, or this needs distributed renewable energy, or this needs dramatic change to public transport. We have silver bullets for everything. The trouble is that we are not trying to understand, we're not trying to acknowledge and understand the complexity of any of these systems before we intervene, right? So we have an interventions first approach. We found many battles, many hard-fought battles on the methods, the interventions, without decent appreciation and understanding of what links to what, and that each of these interventions fits into a context, is part of the puzzle, but never the whole answer. So we started describing what does it, why are we trying to fix climate? Like we've heard many stand-up guy and others refer to the fact that the planet will take care of itself. So what we are really trying to keep it, we're trying to keep it healthy for ourselves. We're trying to keep it going for ourselves. And what makes a place livable is a question that popped up as we started to answer this question. For over the last few hundred years, for the last few thousand years, but dramatically more so in the last few hundred years, we have focused on the second and the third pillars of this a lot, as part of markets, as part of governance structures. Whether you pick, you're free to pick your ism, it fits into one of these buckets, right? All of that has happened at the cost of the ecology. Whether we were trying to fix HDI issues, whether we were trying to create stronger markets for people and fix economies, we were essentially borrowing from the ecology. We assumed that the ecological services that were foundational to any of this were infinite. We could just keep accruing debt there, and this happened across different types of governance structures, market structures, etc., for the better part of a few centuries now at scale. Things like oil only expanded the problem and accelerated it, but I think the trajectory was already set many years ago. And of course, the last bucket there is the stories we tell each other, the pride and sense of identity we create around it, because our stories, our pride and identity also link back to the ecology a lot. You hear about indigenous cultures and so on and so forth a lot today, and it essentially is the memory of a sense of the land and how to live on it, right? So as the ecology gets destroyed, this takes a hit as well. There are other forms of identity and pride that are not particularly healthy and do not help any of the other pillars in a major way, but we'll keep that out of scope. Yeah. So we realize that essentially climate is a place problem. When we're talking about solving climate change or responding to it, we are trying to keep our places and the whole place, the planet, livable for all of us. So every square kilometer of it should have a decent balance of these and be more livable for all of us. So as we went deeper into this, we realized that each community has its own sense of the house. Like at home, you would not prioritize any one of these variables over the others. In the sense, you would not let yourself completely run out of water or completely run out of an income or completely give up on health. But in our places, we've actually done that. We've optimized on a couple of these variables, and we've actually let others fall below what might be considered healthy or important for survival. We're seeing the ill effects of that. So we realized that communities, cities, states, nations, etc., need a better sense of the house, because this is not something we track holistically across. This links back to this image, but so this has become an important go-to mechanism for us, and I'm giving this as a backdrop to the economy question I'm coming to, which is really the thrust of this session here. Because as we start to look at a place, right, we worked on the economy part a lot, but we've not done it for our own homes, in the sense of we don't track the GDP of a village. We don't track the assets of the village in terms of its water security, soil health, its biodiversity, and so on and so forth. We do some sort of a okay job in tracking health, nutrition. We don't track livelihoods. We do not track income levels at a village or a panchayat level, or even a ward level in the city. There is emerging details on mapping vulnerabilities. Waste has popped up, but we don't have good tracking mechanisms for it. Even at the city level, there is a little bit of a debate on it, but every average block or panchayat out there has no clue to it. Carbon and emissions are very, very abstract terms and numbers to us right now. So I think we need to evolve a sense of this at the level of every unit. So now coming to the main topic of this discussion today. These are interesting pictures. You can kind of sort of guess what the one on the right is. It's two pictures that talk about pears that are grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand, and were available on Western shelves. This meme had done the rounds on social media, talking about the crazy miles this actually did before it ended up with a consumer. It didn't have to, because this was grown in the neighborhood of most consumers. The one on the left, one on the left again is a picture of cod caught on the caught off the Norwegian and Swedish coastlines. Before it arrives on the consumer's plate through local supermarkets, it actually travels to China for cleaning and filleting and is sent back. It does about, I think, a 10,000 kilometer round trip before it's served to consumers. So while it's local, it has a lot of miles built into it because of whatever allows it to be economically feasible. Right? This just highlights the structure of the economy today. These two examples were for that. I was in Bhubaneswar last week, and there's a picture from there. The Orissa Millet Mission has been a huge success, and this restaurant is celebrating the millet story in Orissa. As part of their millets push, I found so all the millets that you see here are actually from Orissa, the raw ones. There was also a little basket kept for processed millets. They had millet noodles and millet cookies and stuff like that. And that came from Salem. So I asked them, why are millets traveling 1,000+ kilometers in this country? You know, this processing could have been done here because the value add on those products is much, much higher. So they said, no, nobody here makes this. So a company in Tamil Nadu actually sent this over. So we're just promoting this for now. The fact that something as trivial as millet cookies are not made in the state where the Orissa Millet Mission is a huge success story is a gap, right? It's a value gap, but it's also the transport problem that we were looking for, because these cookies traveled a very, very large number of miles to get to Bhubaneswar, and they didn't have to. Right? So there's also storage and packaging and all of that accrues because of this. So in each of these trade-offs, right? Like each time we make a trade-off saying we don't have cookies here, so let's get it from somewhere else. We accrue some debt. In this case, the debt was the diesel burnt on transport and the packaging involved. This is a picture from a store in Madikeri. I was standing around for some work and I just happened to see the store. And I think it's, I'm in Coorg right now at my farm. So this is a very contextually relevant picture to me. It's fairly evident what's being sold in the store, right? One of the most common sights across India is the strings of packets of chips and such like, of masalas, of all sorts of stuff. Even the brooms in front are not from Coorg. I estimate back of the envelope calculations that Coorg loses anywhere between 9 to 12 crores just buying brooms. Each of these brooms cost between 140 and 170 now. And then they've got these little plastic handles and the plastic packaging on top. Right? This is sold across Coorg, not just in Madikeri, but in all the small towns and the villages. This is what is being used right now. Most of Coorg economy is built. The consumption economy is built around products like these coming from somewhere else, and this is true for all of India. This is not a Coorg problem alone. This is my pet peeve. Because every grandma in India knew how to make pickle. And today, most of India, it's buying its pickle from the city in one form or the other at an exorbitant cost. At my own farm, about a month ago, I got a bottle of pickle served to me, which was from Bangalore, sold at 298 rupees a kg. Some village somewhere probably got 35 bucks for the raw material or 50 bucks for the raw material that it contained. And most of the value addition actually accrued to a city somewhere. So that day, Coorg lost about easily 200 bucks plus in value to the city for a bottle of pickle, and this was lime pickle, and Coorg has some very good local limes. This was something that could have been arrested. That could have accrued there. Plus, Coorg got a plastic bottle for free that we don't know what to do with, because it either goes into a landfill, it's mostly burnt, or it leaches out into the streams and eventually joins the Kaveri, right? So there's no sensible way of dealing with this amount of plastic waste as well. So it's a loss of local production value. It's also a loss of the ingredients, because now you don't, those bitter lime trees that you found in Coorg very often are disappearing. We have been trying to get saplings to expand the number of trees we have at the farm, and it's difficult to get the saplings. We saw this in Orissa, wherever people do not need bamboo anymore, bamboo wasn't growing around there, right? Because most people do not produce their own brooms. The variety of broom grasses India has is crazy, but all of them have started disappearing, because now each of these villages, right, it's buying almost 70-80% of its basket of needs, of its daily needs, from a city or a town far away, essentially, not from its own cluster. It's trying to produce 2 or 3 commodities. In Coorg, it's mostly coffee and pepper, both of which have seen either stagnant value or falling value. And these are cash crops. In most places, you're trying to grow food grains and in a few cases vegetables, but you don't always get very good pricing for it. You sell at below commodity prices, and you hear about all the MSP battles across the country on this account. So you can't keep buying 80% of your basket of needs at MRP from really, really far away and selling at below commodity prices. Because you're doing that, because you're producing 2 or 3 commodities, you're pushing your farm to the edge, both physically as well as from a resource perspective. You're actually pushing the water, you're pushing the soil, you're trying to extract more out of it to get that little extra yield out of it. Your numbers are not going to look great, because the moment the yield goes up, there's enough evidence on this now that prices actually do not keep up with yields. The moment the yields go up, the prices actually fall. So you're selling at basically a cost plus or cost minus in some cases, and you're buying at MRP most of your needs from market really, really far away. Because you're pushing your farm to the edge, there is nothing wild or things that could produce your brooms and pickles and all of that left at the edge of the farm, at the edge of the lakes in the village, at the edge of the village itself. There are no pockets of forest in many, many parts of the country anymore. There are exceptions to this in the Western Ghats, in tribal Orissa, parts of Uttarakhand, and so on and so forth. But in the northern plains, for instance, there are no pockets of trees or forests left for kilometers of farmland. So you're pushing the farms to produce the worst kind of produce in large quantities for yourself and for the markets. And your actual needs are coming from the market at really, really exorbitant prices. This is not math that can actually work out if you multiply this by 30,000 clusters. The 30,000 clusters number represents about 6.5 lakh villages in India. So by how some experts have framed it is that about 20-25 clusters can be a viable economy where a lot of their needs are actually met there. And this was true across India for most daily needs, at least. We're not talking about mobile phones, and we're not talking about that kind of stuff. But even if this 80% comes down to, let's say, 30%, the amount of biodiversity that represents, because you need that growing in your neighborhood, the amount of economic value that's lost today, but it's also an opportunity to address that represents. The amount of number of livelihoods that it can actually generate. And then when you have a surplus, then you can generate secondary livelihoods. The amount of transportation reduction that it represents across India. These are not small numbers by any stretch of imagination. Sadly, we look for evidence on this. We don't have hard evidence. We have pointers. We have pockets of evidence. Somebody's done a little survey in one village somewhere or a panchayat somewhere, but it's not happened at scale yet. But it's extremely evident that even in extremely remote places, in tribal Orissa, for instance, the imports for the basket of need are not small numbers at all. These are deficit economies. I spoke to a professor at IMA who studies the agrarian economy a lot. I posed this question to him about how many of these clusters would be viable and be able to stand on their own if you took out all the waivers, the subsidies, the remittances from elsewhere, the charity, and so on and so forth. And his answer was quite stunning. I was expecting a 5 to 10% answer. He said, optimistically, not more than 150 or 200 of these clusters would actually be viable. That's stunning, because you're saying 94, 95% of the country is in the red right now, economically. They are obviously losing ecologically because of this. They are not resilient. They are dependent on a supply chain for everything they need right now. And they don't have a surplus left. So you can't have a surplus left if you buy MRP and keep earning at the lowest cost cost plus kind of price possible. So obviously the negative surplus doesn't allow it to create an economy. It forces you to migrate out of there. The migrations cause urban concentration and pressure. Local knowledge systems, IP skills, those are lost. These local knowledge and skills included renewable materials to a huge extent. So there is a cascading effect from this again, right? We all know about the inequality and the pressure on the commons that this has created. This to me represents the largest inefficiency we have globally, right? The lengthening of the supply chains, the loss of knowledge, local knowledge systems, the lack of reliance on local ingredients, on local biodiversity, and its subsequent loss. This represents the biggest change pathway to both adaptation and mitigation, because I would suspect that 60-70% of our logistics transportation is superfluous. For instance, toothpaste is like a 12,000 crore industry across India, right? Over half of it is sold in non-tier 1 and tier 2. It's interesting that wherever we went, we realized that rural India was changing toothbrushes more frequently than urban India was, because it says on the packaging that you should change it every 3 months. So people in Kolar said, yeah, we change it 3 or 4 times a year very easily. Plus, we are importing all these 350,000 materials into these places, and they have zero ability to deal with it. The soil, the water, the air, all of it is getting polluted, right? So there's a second order problem building up. It's already built up in terms of health, in terms of air quality, in terms of the ability of the soil to keep regenerating itself. So we believe a very big answer to climate is in what's called the bioregional economy. Linking your economy back to your ecology, linking your economy back to regeneration and to your own biodiversity. So that, your biodiversity and you are in sync, not at war with each other. We believe this will also solve a lot of the other problems we see in terms of urban concentration. Why should India have only like a handful of cities which have surplus value? Why not, out of these 30,000 clusters, why can't 10,000 clusters have a decent surplus and be attractive to a lot of people in terms of production capabilities, in terms of skills, IP, and so on and so forth? We believe it can respond to the migration problem. It can create more resilience as climate change hits. The challenge, of course, is to learn how to do this fast enough and at a large enough scale. So I think these are the principles we're trying to apply to it, that it's across everything. It's not a problem of just energy or just mobility or just water or just fabric, So acknowledging that complexity and building around it and building with it is important. It needs many players. It needs ecosystems to develop, not a single player taking a single solution to a place. The Jevons paradox is a real thing. LED bulbs, I am not sure, actually represent an efficiency drive, because instead of single bulb, people are now using 20. Right? It happened with ultra low emission vehicles in California earlier, and it's a known thing. It's a known reality that most models fail to account for. We have to understand. I think, in our education, both systems thinking and the understanding of emergent systems, where you are chasing foundational principles and not specific outcomes. Right? I think these are two slightly weak areas as we start to solve these problems. We get very married to the specific methods, and we really need like a forest of ideas with the same foundational principles around regeneration, around reducing the miles on products and food and so on and so forth. One simple framing that we've had is, and that we're trying to communicate, is basically if we make the next trillion trade-offs at every level, at the level of the village, individual consumer, policy change or whatever, if we make better trade-offs, because climate change is essentially the last few trillion trade-offs made really badly and debt accrued from them on one or more of these parameters. Each time we solve income, we increase, we accrue debt on health or water. Each time we solve waste, we might actually create more emissions and so on and so forth. So can we make better trade-offs? And if the solutioning is bottom up, if it's a realized need from the community, it's likely to stick. Otherwise, most things just do not last beyond the project cycle and the government scheme that promotes it. So yeah, this is part of the how. I don't think we have all the answers, but we are trying to push this out. One of the huge things is to bring visibility to this sense of the how, so that every unit of geography on this planet is aware of, how you are aware of things being in sync at your own home. Can we do that for our wards and our panchayats and our cities and our villages and so on and so forth? I think a common shared set of intersecting goals needs to evolve across people solving climate change, livelihoods, energy, water, and so on and so forth, because these are intersecting goals. They are not goals we can pursue in silos. Pursuing them in silos, one can argue, actually causes more harm. Part of the response to that is creating adjacency maps so that it becomes obvious. I mentioned this earlier. Instead of interventions, we need to respond to people's needs. So we need to platformize things, enable people to both see the problem and start to put solutions in. We need millions of people doing this change making. Climate change is nobody's job, and it's everybody's job, really, fixing it. We do need policy change because fundamentally today our economies are extractive and destructive. We need a deep shift in that. And of course, it'll, like we keep saying at Rainmatter, if we had to drop everything and do one thing, we would change. We would focus on messaging changes at scale more than anything else. And yeah, this is what I do at least twice a week. I think we owe it to the coming generation, my kids and their kids and so on. But a lot of people, especially in my generation, have been responsible for maximizing the extraction, and hopefully we'll create a toolkit to show some parts out of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the insightful session, Samir. Really enjoyed all the local examples, and I'm sure a lot of people related to the on-ground realities that you had mentioned. We'll open up for questions now.
Hi, Samir. This is Venki here. Just wanted to have a question. Lovely presentation.
Hey, Venki.
Thank you for putting it in a nice Zen way so that we see what is really unfolding. So one question I had was, you talked about the climate adjacency maps, right? So, I'm very interested in that part in terms of what has been your ground experience in really communicating this to some of the decision makers. Like today, at least in, if you look at from an agriculture, we have this ODOP scheme, right? One district, one produce, where we are trying to put together this kind of idea of clusters, at least from a production perspective, right? That said, obviously, we are not looking at the bigger picture in terms of, from the dimension that you are looking at, from the sense of the house that you are looking at. So, maybe some examples in terms of, because I work in agriculture, I'm kind of asking it from that question, but I'm curious to see, is there some way where we can really look at, use these climate agency maps to probably shift the ground context of what we are right now aiming at ODOP schemes?
Thanks. So yeah, that would be very useful. I mean, if we were to, that is the chase. It's not like the government is completely unaware of the intersections and the complexity. For instance, I was pretty amazed to find that in Orissa, there is a large focus of the intersection between water and climate smart agriculture. I'm not sure which level it exists at, but there is a function in the department, the water department, which is focused on climate smart agriculture, and that is quite amazing to see. There is also an organization called PHDM in Orissa, and I'm sure others exist in other states, which cuts across 12 different departments in Orissa. So the intersections are starting to be discussed. However, tactically, I think the idea of these adjacency maps, and if you notice, in our discussion of climate, really we don't really talk about climate, because climate is it's an end product of a lot of bad trade-offs in other things, really. So as we fix our livelihoods, as we fix our incomes in agriculture, nutrition, health, is where we really need to worry about climate in many senses. So for instance, we are begging everybody who's doing livelihoods work to make sure it has a 30%, 40%, 50% intersection with local biodiversity, right? Be it large philanthropies and foundations, be it the livelihood missions of states or the center. We're trying to arrange. There's a lot of literature around understanding the bioregional biodiversity of any bioregion in India. We're trying to see if that can be assembled into a commons platform with other collaborators and be made available freely for this, right? So why the adjacency maps are useful is, for instance, especially for folks in your day-to-day tactical life, whether you are CSR or a government department or a particular CSO doing a specific kind of work, you may be focused only on water or only on energy or only on livelihoods. What else does it impact? If you're fixing energy, but for instance, and this is a real example we came across, if you're funding solar pumps in areas with great water stress already, your intervention is water negative. If you gave it a little bit of thought, you could have done millet hugging machines and made it water positive instead. Right. So it's important to understand what the adjacencies to your core work are. So we're trying to see if we can work with a variety of partners in different spaces and help them create these adjacency maps so that other people are better informed. One disclaimer, I'm seeing a lot of kudos for the ideas, the sense of the house. Nothing in this presentation is original. This has come from dialogues and conversation with a whole lot of people across the country. So, it's not like we sat down and thought about it. Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, one last question. How do you, technically, when we're talking about these clusters, right? I'm curious, how do you define the boundaries of a cluster? In terms of from a village-wise, when you defining it, because obviously there are intersections, right? And if you really go back to some of the previous, at least some kind of a idyllic kind of times when we can think back, where some kind of a bioregional economy was thriving, there was no a certain sense of artificial separation of this is where the thriving was. There were a lot of trades that were happening at an intersectional kind of basis, and also partly that also had to do a lot of with barter also, right? Which was also happening in those times. So I'm curious, when you are right now looking at armed with all the data, with all the tools of complexity, how does one determine the boundaries of a particular cluster?
There are a few people working with different framings. I think Ilango Ramaswamy is working with a 20 or 25 village cluster, and he's been working on a similar thought process. We've heard from a few of our partners about 3 or 4 gram panchayat framing. The governments already have cluster level federations and all of that. So I don't think a very hard boundary is necessary. It's the directionality of it, and practically you will use what's available, right? Like if a particular state is likelier to run with blocks are fine. If a particular set of panchayats is already formed a cluster, or a bunch of SAGs have already got a cluster level federation, you'd like to use that. You don't want to create new stuff. What you want to do is bring attention to this problem at some scale. It's definitely beyond a village, right? Your cell phones will continue to come from China for the foreseeable future. That's your cluster, right? But for your pickle and for your broom, maybe you don't need to go that far. So I think it's that thought process getting set in motion that's more useful than a very hard boundary for a cluster. It'll look very different in the hills, for instance, for sure. Folks at FES were talking about a watershed being a natural boundary. So honestly, no one answer to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venki. Samir, we have a few questions in the chat box. Ashutosh has asked, 2023 is the year of the millet, and the Orissa example was great to see here. How do we balance between the local need and what can go global?
So part of the reason was that wherever we went, we got this question of finding market connects. And when we started looking around, we realized that the places were very large markets themselves. FMCG in India is a very big industry largely because of non-tier 1 India, not because of tier 1 India. In fact, tier 1 India gets the lowest unit prices for practically everything. So while a certain amount of the produce can be exported, because especially specialized produce, like for instance, stuff like millets should never travel more than 100-150 kilometers. It doesn't need to. Millets are grown everywhere in the world, right? We had a few fads recently around this millet or that millet, but honestly, we have local options available everywhere, so they don't need to travel.
And I have also a follow-up question, if I can. Can I?
Yes, sure.
Just to give a context, since you spoke something like millet, something like a coffee, which is, the premium coffee is specifically grown in some areas, some geographical areas, and its position is very premium, leading to a demand. Now, how can non or specific areas only be focused on that? Can we address that issue?
I think I'm sitting in Coorg right now at my own farm where we have some coffee. And I think I do see the destruction that coffee causes to the Western Ghats. It's not as destructive as tea, but it's not benign either. So even 30 years ago, planters were growing coffee with a lot of citrus fruit, and fruit is a great option for Coorg as well. So bringing more diversity, instead of focusing on one commodity. This is the same district which is now buying most of its vegetables, all of its fruit, etc., from outside as well, and at rates higher than Bangalore. This is a district which is probably losing, I would hazard a guess that it's about 20 to 25 crores on buying pickle, 10 to 12 crores on buying brooms, right? So trying to compensate for all of that with one product over to an extent which is unhealthy from the soil and from the biodiversity perspective, it's a bad trade-off, right? So it's for folks to understand the trade-off that's happening and respond to it. I think the answers will be found within the community, right? Hopefully, if you have a response in specialty coffee, if you are able to get higher pricing, on some specific products, you don't actually need volumes. You don't actually need to push every last acre of the forest into coffee production. So I think it's about those better trade-offs, really.
Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage of nations could be in some threat to 100.
Well, it's already, as 2022 has shown us, it's already under threat. I mean, we have a staggered series of, a scale of droughts that we have not seen on the planet. See, all those theories were written in a time when, like I said, it was assumed that the first pillar here would not be. It was not a question at all. But over the last few years, and especially this year, we've learned that you can't take it for granted, right? So a lot of those theories don't necessarily hold up to scrutiny. Those are in the realm of human myths, but planetary systems are very hard reality. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashutosh. The next question is from Ruchika. Ruchika's asked, how can NGOs working in the remotest of villages act as catalyst of change to protect biodiversity and encourage production of local crops, grains, etc.? Also, can e-commerce platforms be a viable option to encourage selling of local produce, again with the help of NGOs and corporations who are working with the local agricultural communities?
So this is the reason we actually got to the economy problem, because so far we were thinking of soil. We're working with a lot of folks doing agroecology, working with communities for greater adoption for agroecological methods, restoration, and so on and so forth. But what we realized is both the losses from not doing that and the benefits from doing that are second order effects, right? A bad state of biodiversity will eventually tell you on your income and health, right? But it happens few years down the line. It's not an immediate loss that you are able to see. And so you're not able to see the immediate benefit from it as well. But it's definitely there. What we realized is there was, like somebody in my team commented in jest, that, thank God the supply chain has left this little on the plates of 95% of India. Because if it was not the case, the first order problem would not be visible. It would not be possible to make it visible. Today, the fact is that most of India is actually, losing on every transaction. So we believe that highlighting this has a foot in the door. One product at a time, one need at a time that the village realizes. And we did a couple of surveys around what the local basket of needs look like. It was interesting that in those couple of surveys, people didn't just come back with data. They came back with an ask. In one case, they asked for, hey, you know what, we seem to be spending a lot of money on vegetable oil. Can we do our own production? Can you help us? Or masala packets. Or, I think there were 3 or 4 such requests we got from the folks actually involved in the survey. This is within the space of a day. This is not validated data. This is not research grade defensible data, but it actually told them the story and they actually realized the need for doing this. So if we make the problem visible, one product at a time, one more shift at a time, I think the CSO partners can actually help this transition through this method quite easily, because it is a real problem and people will see it. Nobody likes to be taken for a ride, and I think 95% of the country is being taken for a ride right
now. This is Anjali here. I'm from Bangalore.
Hey,
hi. So I just wanted to say that it's such a beautiful coincidence that I happened to listen to your conversation today. So I actually work to promote soil biodiversity, and plastic pollution is something that's bothered me for ages, and we're trying to do something to mitigate that, right? And I realized that for any of these things to work, it requires it. So there are some aspects to it for it to work. For instance, people have to participate in it, communities have to participate in it, which means we need awareness, because the 50 odd people that are here right now, are concerned about the various things that you talk about, but the remaining millions of people are not, right? So it doesn't matter to them, it matters to us. So that's a huge gap for me. Secondly, like you rightly said, systemic changes, policies are also crucial, and we don't have the sufficient infrastructure or frameworks or platforms, digital or physical, in place for all of this to sustain and continue for a good period of time, right? So while I work on the policy and the on the framework and the solution itself, uh, so this participative nature is something that I feel that I will struggle with, and in parallel, I'm also a member of Climate Practitioners India Network, which is launched by National Institute of Urban Affairs. So, where I just last week I sent out a mail saying that, listen, plastic pollution is a huge problem. I want to work with people who care as much, and let's do something about it. So I got a really good response. So my question to you, Samir, is you touched on the fact that when it comes to waste, there is some missing data, right? Because when I go after data, it's all top-down approach, meaning industries are giving this, but it's not accurate, right? We know it's not accurate for whatever reasons. We don't have ground data, right?
Yeah.
That this house is giving this much, or this village is giving this much.
Yeah.
So what's your guidance on what exactly is it we need to tackle, and how do we go about it to this group of people that I've collected? Sorry for the long question.
Yeah. So one is so we're trying to avoid interventions. We're it's not about participation. It's actually about a pull. We're actually working with a lot of partners, and we are trying to drive home the point that please do not respond unless there's a pull, and only respond to what the pull is about. If the pull is about if in a particular rice growing belt, if people sit together with these indicators, so facilitate that part of it where they are able to get a sense of the house better than today. That is something we are hoping the CSOs and people with social capital are able to do better than any of us, for sure, because they already have a conversation. If a region feels that we have a very high yield of rice, higher than Punjab, and I'm quoting from a real instance, but our cancer rates are starting to creep up to what Punjab is seeing, right? And we want health solved first. Then the foot in the door is really health, because that's what the community care is about. If it's an opportunity to create an oil extraction unit, it's that. So our set of responses to a realized need, I think, will be a lot stickier than going in with interventions. So for instance, for waste, we actually have had a few large CSOs working on the agrarian ecology and on farming systems come back saying we are starting to see waste problems. How do we address it? So obviously they need partnerships on that. Right now, it's a need coming ground up, not being pushed top down. It's not a mission from the government or from a philanthropy. It's a real need. It's a need that the community has. So that's one part of it. On data, honestly, I mean, I don't have a good answer. We believe that if the community gets this sense of the house, whether it's hard data or whether it's a sense, perception is reality. And a few partners have expressed that they want to try it using PRA methods. We're hoping that will create some evidence. We are talking to folks like CEW, folks like CSCI, etc., on some, how do we manage the data on it as well. I don't think we have answers, to be honest. And you're right. Top-down data is mostly inaccurate.
Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank the team and Samir, both to you, especially for two reasons. First was the style of presentation. Since I come from the corporate sector, especially hearing a lot of about, like, I'm into the sustainability and CSR field. So every now and then, it's all flooded with so much of information, especially the corporatized information on sustainability and climate change, where we are actually typically selling the very large scale general solutions like the EVs or the solar panels. So this is like a different kind of a presentation in ages, I can say, what I've come across, where we are actually discussing. And second is when half of the presentation time is being devoted to the what you can say question answers after the presentation. So that's thank you. I had two major questions. Like first was especially on like when we are looking at the planetary boundaries, the initial slides where you were trying to draw attention to how much like minimalism is like how important do we feel at both at global, I will not say global, but at an individual or at a societal level are important when it comes to addressing this problem, because that none of the governments or what you can say none of the organizations, the institutes are speaking of it. Minimalistic or say optimum consumption of resources at an individual or at society or a family level. That was first question. And second was like quoting relating to the lengthening of the supply chains. That's a classic example of when we as Indians are consuming olive oil. I don't know like if it's a marketing gimmick, like a Mediterranean diet is been consumed in a tropical country when we have different sources of oils or what you could say oil seeds right from different regions of India. Like what do you feel like when we are celebrating the growth of Indian economy at a fifth stage in the, is it like the environmental cost of the economy is being hidden, which is being we as a consumer or we as a citizen or we as an individuals are turning a blind eye to? Like what's the cost of the natural capital, how that can be included so that the real cost of the economy or the real value of the economy is seen?
Yeah, so I'll start with the last bit first. We are trying to include asset quality of the village, because it's like trying to increase the rent of your house when your foundation is continuously being eroded, right? If the village's soil health, its water sources, its air quality, its biodiversity is lost, you can almost put a date to when it's going to migrate out of the place, right? And every village in India is on that journey. Whether now or later, it's a question of time. But by and large, we are on that journey, because without your solid assets being secure, you're not in a good place. China is learning that the hard way. India is on that journey. It's not just in India, it's not just in China, it's across the globe that we've not counted these costs, right? So I think that accounting needs to be revised for sure. On the consumption part, I think minimalism, most people in India are living sub-minimally already, right? I was at this Orissa Museum of Tribal Arts and Crafts, and it was frustrating to see all that was on display coming from the same villages which believe they do not have any skills, any ability, any production capacity left today. And they were producing such amazing stuff even in the past. And there was clearly a very rich life, right? So most people in most of India are actually consuming a lot lesser than they were at a much higher energy cost, at a much higher footprint. So yes, the peak consumption has to drop. That's in the West and in the western part of India, which is our apartments, communities, and the mega cities and so on and so forth. It has to drop dramatically there. But for most Indians, the consumption levels will actually go up. The consumption quality will actually go up. It will not actually fall. The economy will actually improve for most Indians. Today, when we say that the Indian economy is growing, it's actually growing for less than 3, 4, 5% Indians. 95% of India is not a participant in that. Right? It shows up in your income numbers, which have fallen after COVID for 94% people. It shows up in the, I think pre-COVID, there were numbers that 83% households were spending more than they were earning. And post, we've stopped collecting the data now because it's not interesting data. And it bears out, you just have to look at any local basket of needs. It bears out again. So for most of the country, it's actually going to be better consumption in terms of food, the basics, and so on and so forth, because your diversity of what's available in your area will actually increase. You're actually even in the cities, your plate will actually get richer. No, not in the processed food sense, but in the true sense, your plate will actually get richer. the bit about our dependence on long supply chains, yes, even our sunflower oil comes from Ukraine, not just olive oil. So even what we thought is very, very Indian is actually not Indian anymore. And this is much, much worse at the level of a village.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar. Samir, there's a lot of questions on the chat box, but I think we have time for maybe one or two more, if that's okay.
Sure, I'm good.
So Tarun has said, thanks a lot for this wonderful sharing of perspective and your experience with us. Building demand for such change from the communities is not always intervening, is a point that strongly resonated. Will be great to hear if there are thoughts about building this demand from the communities, and if possible, especially in the urban context.
So, yeah, so I think we are we're hoping that people with social capital out there are able to drive this conversation. The political economy will follow. They are not going to be leading on this. The market is not going to follow. It's going to be, it's not going to lead. It's going to again follow on this. But people with social capital interested in change, and in our conversations, we are optimistic that people are starting to look at it as a place problem and look at it as a bioregional economic problem. So I don't think we know exactly how this will work or to what extent, but at this point, what else do we have but optimism? You know, so we have to go with something. Yeah, the urban context is a funny one because I think, like we were discussing in the last response, it is coming. It's about a coming down from massive levels of consumption of, like somebody described, a city is essentially a massive consumer of people, energy, resources, etc., and it spits out toxic air, water, and aspirations. Right. So we have to wind down from what a city looks like today, but we also have to create these next 1,000 places which have a surplus where collaboration happens without this kind of a footprint. Right. So our urban imagination needs a very hard reset of what it means to be urban. We think in terms of size and population and flyovers today, but we have to really think in terms of the benefits of agglomeration, of the collaborations that happen. You know, Dharwad used to be very famous for, is still very famous for Hindustani classical music. And a lot of people actually gather there for that reason and then disperse. There were centers of learning, there were centers for silk, there were centers for trade, and so on and so forth. Today, all the value accrues to maybe half a dozen or a dozen cities. All the people want to come there. I think we need to reset that imagination, and it'll follow with more surplus being accrued to more places. So I don't know. I think the conversation with the city is about its responsibility today, more than anything else. And not just the city, the ward. City is a very large unit. What your ward is doing to the ward downstream from you, in terms of water, in terms of air, what is it doing to the hinterland around? What are you expelling out there? I think that's responsibility, the big question to have.
Just one last question. Jay has asked, as we all know, the cities are the most optimistic tool to figure out to combat climate change and action. As India is a developing country, how economic-oriented climate action plan should be prepared for state and city from where major GHG emissions generated? What type of policy regulations should central government put forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping the answers will emerge in the next couple of years for us. The cities are economic drivers today, so they carry a bit of the responsibility. If they were to, if our economic structures were to naturally leave more value and local creation, reduce transportation, etc., it would be great, but I don't see that happening, to be honest. I think it'll, you know, the losers of the current economic system are the ones likeliest to want to change. Most people in the city are not, they are winners of the economic system, right? So they have a disincentive built into this. So it will have to be controls on the amount of pollution you can cause to start.
Vijeta has asked, thank you for an interesting session. And yes, absolutely, we need an ecosystem approach. But how do we break the silos approach at the system level? When production is scaled with a commercial perspective and market economy led, how do we make the policymakers to strategize in a climate-friendly way, which shall provide economic viable interventions to the small and marginal farmers?
So one is there are a bunch of responses that are possible at the level of the local unit itself, or the cluster. Right? If we were in a place in Odisha called Raidakol, population of 3 lakh in a very large area, 650 villages, very, very sparsely populated. Their toothbrush bill for the year is about 1.2 crores. Right? It's a backward area economically. The 1.2 crores is a huge loss. It's also an opportunity for the place. And if the place decides to respond to it, and there are bamboo toothbrushes being made for a premium by people in Dharwad out of Orissa, bamboo from Orissa. Right? So it's possible to complete this loop locally and respond to this market that has now got created because people want to use toothbrushes right there. It doesn't really need too much intervention. If people decide to make their own pickle, who can stop you? Right? It's pickle, for God's sake. But there are larger shifts needed, like this idea of equally, pricing commodities equally across the country. Apples in Bangalore should cost more than they cost in Shimla. It's absurd that we are trying to, through policy, drive equal pricing for all commodities across the country. It's not climate smart. It may be economics smart, but accounting for climate, that doesn't really hold up. So yes, policy shifts do need to happen. The government is starting to think out of silos. Tamil Nadu has this Department of Climate Change, which is definitely thinking across silos. Right? It's a very, very progressive move. Of course, they have to reconcile it with the $1 trillion economy goal and so on and so forth. But I think that'll happen because as they start to think of it. So we saw this in Orissa. We've heard this in Chhattisgarh that they want to link their economy and ecology closer in a much stronger way. We have heard of good things from the Northeast. So there are large pockets of this acknowledgement emerging. How fast we can do this transformation, I think, is the big question now.
Thank you, Samir. I think with that, we'll wrap up for this evening. Thank you so much again for your time. Everybody else, thank you so much for taking out your Friday evening to attend this. Hope you all have a good weekend.